with a flathead screwdriver. I'm going to go ahead and unscrew this drain plug for the radiator. As you unscrew it, just be careful of coolant splashing on you. Now from under the hood, I'm going to take the radiator cap off. This will speed up the draining process a little bit. There we go. This is going to let air go in as the coolant comes out. Now we have to remove this air intake. I'm going to start on one side and just remove all the push clips. Work your way to the other side. This one looks like it has some sort of a screw in the middle that you have to unscrew and pry up. This one's different once again. Pop that out. Now you can remove this piece and just unwedge it from the air box. Set this aside. Let's remove all these wires from the fan shroud. Someone has wire tied these on. I guess the original connectors are no longer good, so I'm going to do the same at the end, but they have to come loose because this has to come up and out. With the help of some needle nose pliers, I'm going to grab this connector and disconnect it from the fan. A lot of times these get stuffed up with sand, so it gets difficult to disconnect it. And let's do the same to this one over here. Perfect. Now this harness can be set aside, and it's out of our way. And this one here, I'm just going to tuck underneath. That way it's out of our way as well. And make sure everything else is disconnected. Nothing is attached to this fan assembly. Next, I'm going to disconnect this overflow hose. Set this aside. Disconnect the upper radiator hose. Just grab the hose clamp with some pliers. Squeeze it, move it out of the way. Now twist the hose and remove it from the radiator. Okay. All right, next I'm going to remove the battery. Someone has put in this extremely long bolt here. So whatever you have, just remove it. Basically, I'm trying to remove this support here. That way I can get this battery unhooked and removed. Okay, remove the hold down. Now with a 10mm, I'm going to remove both of these terminals. I'm going to start with the negative. It's always best to start with the negative and then end with the negative when you reconnect. Okay, loosen this up. Set that aside. Remove the positive as well. Set that aside as well. That's a lot of corrosion. Gonna have to clean that up before it gets reinstalled. And now remove the battery. Now take this plastic piece off. And one last thing to remove is this battery tray here. That'll give us a lot more access to remove the radiator. Before I go any further, I want to unclip these wires from these retainers here. Someone's already been in here and the clips are broken, so for me the wires are loose, but go ahead and pop them out. And next, I'm going to disconnect this fuse box. If you take a little screwdriver, put it in there and press on this tab and then pull up, that'll unlock it from here. And there's one more on this side. Do the same thing, press on it, pull it up, and now just gently wiggle it out of place. Set that aside so it's out of your way. Probably just going to bungee cord it so it stays here. At this point, there are supposed to be several 12mm bolts that hold this plate on. For me, there are only 2 left. There was supposed to be one here, and then there were supposed to be 2 more on these 2 corners. They already broke off for someone else, so I'm just going to remove these 2, and then hopefully we can pull this tray right out. Just be careful, these are a lot of times very rusty. That's most likely why the other ones are broken. Now let's remove this tray, get it out of our way. Be very careful because this white stuff here is battery corrosion. You don't want to get it on your skin or in your eyes or anything. Now, back underneath, I'm going to remove this splash shield. This will be the easiest way to get the lower radiator hose off as well as the transmission cooler line. So remove all of these push clips. I have about half of them on mine that are just completely missing. So whatever you have for push clips, just remove them so that splash shield can be removed. Looks Looks like one more on this side. Oh, there we go. Last one. All right, remove the splash shield. I'm going to put this plug back in just so that the radiator stops dripping. More coolant will come out when we undo the lower radiator hose, but at least it won't be dripping on me. Make that nice and snug. That way when you're ready to reinstall, you don't have to worry about it. Now I'm going to disconnect the lower radiator hose, grab some pliers, move the hose clamp out of the way, and then you take the hose and twist it. You can give it a twist with some pliers, just be careful how much you squeeze. You don't want to damage the hose. And now pull it off of the radiator. Be careful when you do this because some coolant might still be in here. This part is actually lower than the drain plug, so yep, here we go. Just set that to the side. Now we have to disconnect these two lines here, this one and this one. They're for the transmission cooler. So grab your pliers, squeeze the hose clamp, move it to the side, break it free. Some transmission fluid might come out, so make sure you have a separate collection bucket. You don't want to mix oil and coolant. Try and wiggle this hose off, almost. There we go, yep, there's some transmission fluid coming out. Now let's do the same to this one over here. Remove the hose clamp. If your hose clamps are very weak, like these ones are, I'm going to replace them with new ones. You can go ahead and do the same thing. This one is extremely weak, so it won't seal up. You'll get a leak when you're done. Okay, break the hose free. Let's remove it. Okay. Perfect. Let this one drain a little bit too, and then I'm going to tuck it up above here just like that so it can stop leaking. Perfect. Let's go back up top. Now to remove this radiator with the fan assembly, you want to grab, there's two little clips here. Here's one right here. Pry that out. At the same time, I'm going to pry this other one out. Pull out on the radiator. This comes off. Set that aside. Do the same to this side right here. Use a screwdriver. There we go. Remove that. Now the radiator can hopefully come right up and out of here. It's hard to grab. More coolant will come out. I'm just going to pause here for a second so it can drain before I make a mess on top of the engine. All right. Just keep wiggling it. And here's your radiator. Next, I'm going to disconnect this connector here. I want to free up the whole harness that goes to the alternator so I can move it out of the way. There we go. Move that to the side. And next, I want to disconnect that connector right there that goes on the alternator. Pull up on that, remove it. Now if you remove this boot here, that'll expose a 13mm nut. Let's unbolt that. This shouldn't be very tight. Remove the nut. And remove the cable. One more wire that is attached to this whole harness is underneath on the AC compressor, and we can get that from down below. So I'm going to set this aside for now. Next, we have to go through this front right fender well here. So we have to remove the wheel to get access to everything. 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts, and then take the wheel off. One last wire to unplug from underneath is the AC compressor switch wire. Be very gentle with it because it's a single wire connector and it's very delicate, but it does get stuck in there. All right. Now from inside the fender well with a 14mm wrench, I'm going to loosen up this nut for the tensioner. Just bring it back a couple turns You don't have to remove it all the way, or not yet at least, but basically what this is going to do is it's going to allow the tensioning bolt, which is up top, to move this idler pulley up, to move this tensioner pulley up and down. That way we can remove tension off the belt. Now back at the top, we're going to have to remove tension off that tensioner. With a 14mm socket, you want to look in between this fuse box and the engine, and that right there is the tensioning bolt. So slide your socket with a swivel down there. The only thing I can really fit is a 1/4" drive socket. And try to get your socket to fit. Once it's on there, loosen on the bolt, and that should pull the tensioner up. I sprayed it with some rust penetrant to hopefully make this a little bit easier to turn. And it looks like it's working. Checking it again from underneath. And it looks like the belt does come off, so let's take our tool off of here, go back underneath, and remove the belt off the tensioner. Now, back underneath, I'm going to remove the belt off the pulley, take it off of all the pulleys, off the AC, off the alternator, and remove it from the vehicle. Now, finish removing this nut. Watch out for this little washer here that's in between. Make sure you don't lose that. Oh, take that off. Take this off. Remember which way it goes. And let's remove the pulley off of the tensioner bracket. So up here, you'll see a 12mm bolt. That has to come off. And you can reach it from the front of the vehicle. Just stick your socket down in there. Make sure you grab onto the bolt well. There we go. Remove that completely. With a 14mm socket, I'm going to remove this nut right there. Put my socket on. Okay, it's coming off. Take this nut off completely and push the bolt through. Now reach from the front, push out the bolt. There we go. That comes out. Now the alternator is ready to come out. Now, with a little pry bar, I'm just going to try to pry the alternator out of its bracket here. There we go. Okay, and here is your old alternator. Now take your new alternator, slide it in the same way that the old one came out, and just try to line it up with where it's supposed to go. A couple of these hoses are going to be in your way here, but just push them aside. There we go. And I have my bottom bolt ready. Going to try and slide it through. Now take your bolt, line it up, and press it in all the way. Wiggle the alternator around. That should allow it to line up with all of its holes that it has to go through. Now let's install the top bolt. Push the alternator up. Let's start in the top bolt. And snug them both up. Now let's tighten this up. Make sure this is nice and tight. There's no way you can really torque this thing, so just Just make it tight by hand. Perfect. Now let's put on the nut at the front, and you want to make sure that your bolt is still lined up with the tab going around that little ear of the alternator. That way it can hook on as you're tightening. And just bottom this bolt out completely. Okay, that's getting snug. I'm going to grab my larger ratchet. And with my larger ratchet, I'm going to make sure it's nice and tight. Again, I don't have a torque wrench that fits in here, so I'm going to have to rely on just doing it by feel. You don't want to over tighten it. I would say once it's bottomed out and snug, go about half a turn, 3/4 of a turn at most. Now let's reinstall the tensioner pulley. Line up, and you want to pull this stud out and through. Sometimes it can get pushed in. Reinstall this washer and the nut. Let's get it close by hand, but don't make it tight yet because we still have to adjust the tension. So now let's put the belt on. I'm actually going to start right here at the crank pulley, bring it over, make sure it's seated on all the way, put it underneath the tensioner, underneath the AC compressor, and finally over the alternator. And if you loosen this enough, you'll have enough slack to do all this. If not, well, just loosen it more, or leave this for last because it's easier to slip it on being a flat pulley as opposed to the ribbed ones. So I'm just going to feel around, make sure that it's seated all the way. If it's one rib off like this, it's just going to shred itself to pieces as soon as you start the car. So make sure it's seated all the way, which it is. And now let's go put tension on the tensioner. From up top, let's get the tension back on the belt. Let's just tighten this up until you see the belt getting some pressure on it, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's at the right tightness. It's important with these manual tensioners that you get it just right. Otherwise, if you over tighten the belt, you will ruin all of your bearings in all of the pulleys, so alternator, AC, tensioner, all that. And if you get it under tightened or loosened, well, it's just going to squeal and it'll ruin itself. So let's just get it close to where it was, and then I'll show you how to check it. Okay, right there I feel some tension building, so let's pause, go underneath. You want to take the longest stretch of belt. In this case, it's going to be between the harmonic balancer and the AC compressor. This is the longest stretch of straight belt. You want to take it and twist it 90 degrees. If it twists close or 90 degrees exactly with minimal force, that's good. If it goes past with minimal force, it's too loose. If it stops like right here, that's way too tight. So mine actually stops right about here. So I'd say about 70, 80 degrees, which is exactly what you want. You don't want it any tighter or any looser. Like I said, if it's just this much and then beyond that, it requires a lot of force, that's way too tight. And of course, if you can spin it over and over, that's way too loose. Now get your tool out of here, and this part is done, but we do have to lock in the tensioner. Otherwise, this bolt can, with vibrations, I guess self-adjust, but in a bad way because it'll either loosen up, because it'll most likely just loosen up on you. All right, one last step is to tighten up this bolt. Make sure it's nice and tight. You don't want this idler pulley, you don't want this tensioner pulley to come loose on you. Right there. Perfect. Now let's connect this wire for the AC compressor. Make sure it clicks in and it's secure. Let's reinstall the wheel. .83 foot-pounds. Perfect. Now let's connect the alternator wire here. Make sure it clicks into place. Take the main power wire, make sure it's clean. That way it can make a good connection. Slide it over, get the new nut, and start that on, and let's tighten it up. You don't need to tighten this very much. It's a very delicate connection, and you can actually break this stud internally in the alternator So just make it snug, that should be good. This is still a 13mm socket, just like the original one. Perfect. And don't forget to put the boot on just to protect it from any water and debris that might be making its way up here. One last connection. It's going to be this one up here. Make sure it clicks. Now this harness is reconnected everywhere. So let's move on. On the bottom of the radiator, you'll see a tab on each corner. Those actually have to line up with the rubber grommets at the bottom on the radiator support. So as you slide it in, you want to pay attention to that. And of course, you want to make sure that stuff like this that sticks out doesn't poke into your radiator. That is not going to be very good for the fins. So try and slide it down. Things might be in your way, but just wiggle it. And as you get down there, you'll feel it drop into place. Just make sure you line up those tabs. And that side actually just fell right in. This side, not yet. Nope, there we go. Perfect. So now that it dropped in, let's get the mounts on the top. These are very worn, obviously, but you get the point. Basically, you have to slide them over and clip it in. That's going to lock in your radiator. Let's do the same to the other side. Slide it over and make sure it clicks so that it's locked in. Double check it on the bottom. Yep, perfect. Now let's reconnect these hoses on the bottom. Make sure it gets pressed on all the way. And like I mentioned, I did replace the hose clamp because mine was very weak and in rusty and poor condition. So I replaced it with one of these worm style clamps. So if yours needs to be replaced, now's the time. Make sure that this is nice and tight. Perfect. Let's reinstall the other hose. And again, press it down all the way. This clamp is still good, so I'm reusing this one. Squeeze it, bring it back. And I like to set it right back where it was because most likely it basically formed a groove into the hose, and if you put it back where it was, it's going to seal up the best. One last hose is the lower radiator hose. Go ahead and reconnect that. Slide it on all the way. Grab the hose clamp, squeeze it, and let's reposition it to just about where it was before. Right there. Perfect. Just going to double check the drain plug here. Sometimes it's a little loose and you want it to be nice and tight so you have no leaks. Let's reinstall this splash shield, line it up, and I had a lot of push clips missing. I'll come back and install all of them, that way it's nice and secure. Perfect. Let's plug in the two electrical connectors. Oops. Perfect. And number 2. All right, and clip in the wiring harness wherever it needs to be clipped in. Right here and right there. Reconnect the overflow hose. Press it on all the way and put the clamp back where it was. Now reconnect the top radiator hose. Slide it on and put the clamp back where it belongs. Perfect. Let's install the battery tray next and line it up. If you still have all of your bolts, of course, put them all in. I only have 2 left here. Snug them up. Okay, nice and snug. Let's put back the plastic tray. Make sure it sits in properly, and let's get the battery. Okay, battery's installed. I cleaned up the terminals a little bit. Let's start with the positive. Press it down all the way, and let's snug it up. That's tight. Let's snug up this negative terminal as well. All right, That's nice and tight. Let's get the battery hold down in place. Slide the hooks over, as well as this top bracket, and hook them into their corresponding holes here. That's one. Second one. You don't have to go very tight on this. Just make it finger tight. This is just here to hold down your battery nice and secure. Don't forget about this fuse box. Line it up, press it down into place. Let's get the air intake duct back on. Try to squeeze it past the radiator under this battery terminal wire and into the air box. Line up all three of the push clip holes and press the push clips in. Okay, so I have my coolant funnel here, and this is going to help me with two things. One, it'll help self-bleed better because this is now higher than the engine, so all the air is going to want to come out here as opposed to get stuck in the engine. Also, this is going to help me not spill coolant when I fill it. So I'm going to fill it with manufacturer specified coolant. I'm going to fill it to the top. Once it's done, I'll run the vehicle, and you want to run it with the heat on inside the car, and you want to wait for all the air bubbles to come out. Once your cooling fans have come on and you have no more air bubbles, you can shut the car off, let it cool down, and we'll cap it off from there. Now at this point is when I would turn on the car like I explained before with the heat on, let it run until the cooling fans come on, make sure it doesn't overheat, and once it has reached full operating temperature, shut it off, plug this up, and I'm going to take it out of here. I'm going to take this off of here, remove my adapter, and what I'm going to do with the rest of this is actually fill the overflow tank. So I'm going to go over here. So I'm going to put the rest into my overflow and make sure that it has at least enough to reach the maximum line. Perfect. This was actually just enough coolant. Cap this off. All right, let's put the cap on, clean up our mess, and take it for a road test.